If you spent 30 years building your client's wealth, you don't want to see it tearing apart families or being dilapidated by family members suing each other. The only people that win at that time are the lawyers.
Welcome to The Endgame by ClearEstate, life's final chapter discussed openly. I'm Davide, the co-founder and CEO of ClearEstate. In these conversations, we get real about estates and legacies and our effort to disrupt old systems with a new technology and a fresh take and sometimes humorous take on difficult conversations, sometimes difficult topics. I'm joined by my wonderful co-host, colleague, and let's do it. Estate Oracle at ClearEstate. Sara, how are you?
Hi, Davide. Good, thanks.
And today we're going to have Alex, one of the co-founders of ClearEstate, on the podcast, and we're going to talk about estate planning. And we kind of, want this episode to be a bit of an estate planning 101 type of episode. And we use this lingo internally all the time about, there's a difference between a will and an estate plan. And I know you've said this to me, I think day minus 15 of you joining ClearEstate, but what's the difference, Sarah?
It's a great question, and we'll go into a lot of details on it with Alex. But I mean, fundamentally, a will is a document. It's an output of an estate plan, which is a much more comprehensive operating system.
And it's not the only output. There's other outputs, and I think that's
correct.
But estate planning is a process. It's both thinking, it's gathering information, it's conversations, and then there's multiple outputs. So I think it's a key distinction, and I think a lot of people think, I need to get my will done. And I think when you're 25, 30, getting your will done is pretty straightforward. But I think later in life, when things get more complicated and you have more people to take care of, more stuff, as we pointed out, more considerations. That process is important, and I think we'll cover that with Alex today. Please don't forget to subscribe to The Endgame by ClearEstate on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform.
You're listening to The Endgame by ClearEstate. I'm Sara Hillier, ClearEstate's head of estate planning and settlement solutions. Let's dive right into a specialized topic today that seems simple, but is anything but. What is a will versus what is an estate plan? Alex joins me. Welcome back to the pod.
Hey, thanks, Sara.
So, Alex, we've had a lot of interesting conversations over the years about, the traditional output of an estate plan, which is obviously a will document. However, I think a lot of times folks don't really understand what we mean when we say, well, you need an entire estate plan, a comprehensive one. What are your kind of, initial thoughts, or what jumps out at you about this and the importance of this distinction?
Yeah, to me, the most obvious thing that comes out is that there's no universal definition of what an estate plan is. And if you ask 50 different lawyers, you're going to get 50 different answers. And if you ask 50 different industry professionals, you're going to get very different answers based on their specific set of specialties. I think there should be a universal definition, whether it's per jurisdiction, right? There could be variations, and I admit that. But I think humbly that I over the years, and I've given a lot of thought to it. I think I'm very close to what the proper definition of an estate plan is, and I think a lot of people at ClearEstate, well, they have to agree with me, but I think they would naturally agree with me as well.
I'm laughing because I don't always agree with you. So I see, like, in some places we kind of like to describe an estate plan as, clearly more than just a legal document, that it's really an entire operating system. So can you give us, some examples of what we actually mean when we say, and when we're referring to an estate plan, like what does it actually include?
Well, to me, an estate plan is every piece of information that is necessary so that the administration of the estate goes without surprises. It's the surprises and the discovery and the detective work that is incredibly difficult to do when you've passed away, and that is so easy for you in the moment while you're alive to organize your thoughts properly in a way that we can convey that message to the next generation very easily. So that's what estate planning is to me. It's getting all of the pieces of the puzzle together while you're alive and well, so that when you're not there, we've gotten every piece of information we needed to settle the estate in a timely manner and with as few surprises and delays as possible.
Okay, so we know what an estate plan is, but let's talk about the specific things that are actually included in it so that everybody is on the same page here and we all have a good understanding of what we mean. Let's start with the easiest, most obvious one, a will. Okay, so of course, a will is a legal document where you effectively distribute your estate to the beneficiaries. Now, Alex, what else are we talking about here? How about your executor or co-executor designations? What about that?
Yeah, I think it's really important to have a conversation and a thoughtful thinking process around who's the right person or persons to be executor or co-executor. So I think those are tremendously different, important. You need people who have proximity to the most of the assets. I think you need someone who can keep a cool head and be emotionally detached from the process. Someone who hasn't had a lot of tension with other family members that are designated beneficiaries of the estate, and as a result can be viewed as a neutral party in the process.
And I think another important role in an estate plan is the potential trustees of any trusts that you might include in your will. And those trustees could be your executor or they could be a different party. And again, same thought process of, are they the right person for the job? And, does it make sense? And I think there's additional consideration when you're thinking about trustees, particularly with family dynamics, because this is kind of typically a role that lasts often much longer than an estate settlement. So how does that play out over time? But that's another important, distinction that needs to be thought about and considered as part of an overall estate plan. It obviously, these appointments we're talking about, they do go in your will, but having a fulsome discussion about them would be, part of your comprehensive estate plan. What about beneficiaries? Like, what do we need about beneficiaries in an estate plan?
I think we need the full list of who are the beneficiaries, what are their relationships to myself, are there charitable organizations in there, are they how are they? I think we need to think about whether or not they're residual beneficiaries and whether or not they're specific bequest beneficiaries, and then we need to think about those proportions because we've seen cases where your residual beneficiaries could get less than some of your specific bequest beneficiaries if things happen that weren't properly planned in your estate. Contact information for all these people and understanding if there are particular dynamics, relationship-wise, if there's addiction situations or mental health issues that we should be aware of to protect the beneficiaries again from themselves. I think those are things that's tremendously important information.
Absolutely. And I'm just going to emphasize too that the contact information is actually super critical. And a lot of people overlook this. Like, oh, obviously you'll just know, you'll know how to contact all my beneficiaries. But having up-to-date contact information for your beneficiaries is very critical for your executor because they absolutely can't do their job without. And Unfortunately, it is a common occurrence that beneficiaries can't be located or contacted, which creates a
Uh,
lot of delays.
we recently settled someone's estate who his current spouse and ex-spouse had the same name.
Oh,
And through lack
that's
of contact information and ability to know who was who in the intentions of the will, there were some problematic situations there. So yeah,
that's that's a unique one.
yes.
What about like advisors or kind of, what about how does that interrelate with your estate plan?
Well, any professionals that have been involved with your wealth in general or medical history are tremendously important. I think it is very useful information to get. Where they work, phone number, email address, full name, your wealth advisor, accountant, lawyers, medical professionals, all pharmacists, all of those people there can be an impact on your estate plan in the end, and there's good information to be gotten there.
And we talk a lot about the inventory of assets and liabilities. So, can you describe what that actually means?
Where is the wealth?
Mhm.
So where's actually the number? The amounts are not that important. What we care about is which bank, which branch, what types of bank accounts are there, what types of liabilities there are, mortgage, line of credit, credit card. Oh, there's a car payment, there's a mattress a payment plan with this other financial institution that is difficult to find because I've been paying my bills online. And so it can be hard to identify. So having a full list of these assets and liabilities. I often joke like if there's gold bars hidden in a wall or under the mattress, the someone needs to know, otherwise it won't get distributed. If you have special assets like crypto, NFTs, all of these things should be taken care of. Firearms, if you have firearms, it's important to know. We want to know that they've been registered with the proper authorities. Otherwise, if we need to dispose of them, how they get distributed, all of that. Those are considerations that are really important.
Yeah, everything you own and everything you owe, for
Yes.
sure. So, what about your powers of attorney? Let's define those.
Yes, but I just had a thought that we found pension plans with old employers as well. So your employment
Hmm.
history can lead to pension plans. And I mean, it's possible that it was a large pension plan. You worked there for 5 years, but if it grew for, if you put a few $1,000s there and it grew for 25 years, 40 years, then maybe there's something interesting there that should be taken care of. It's real detective work. It can be quite painful if we don't have the clues and to point us in the right direction.
So, powers of attorney.
Um, I think there's more and more health situations, right? And I think we should plan for the unexpected and what happens if I'm unable to make financial decisions for myself or medical decisions for myself. Who will make those decisions for me?
And those are separate documents, of course, than your will, and super important that we actually, appoint the right people in those roles as well. Oftentimes, I think it's overlooked that, if in the unfortunate situation that your power of attorney does need to come into play, your attorney for property actually has a lot of control over what happens with your assets for that period of time, right? And appointing the wrong person could obviously lead to negative outcomes in your estate, of course, right?
For sure.
What about healthcare directives or advanced directives?
I kind of put it in the same bucket as power attorney for personal care. To me, it's the extension of more circumstances, and it's those what if questions. Very extensive. What if car crash at this time, that time. I'm alive, but vegetative state, and how those are very value driven questions that are extremely personal. So there's no better person to decide what those things should be than yourself, because you're going to remove a huge burden from your children who might be wary that they're not making the right decision on your behalf.
What about, some people might have or might need a digital asset plan? What's that about?
To me, the digital asset, it's your current your cryptos and your self-directed RSP accounts and your NFTs. But to me, it goes a little bit beyond. It's access to Facebook accounts and Instagram and your TikTok, and making sure that they get suspended. You don't want to appear in people's feed for years to come as like, oh, should this friend, is this your friend? And I think there's real considerations to happen there, because it's actually not easy to suspend these accounts with Meta and the other providers.
It can be tricky from a legal perspective to address those types of assets and profiles.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk for a sec about we personal effects, memos or letters of wishes, which are sort of supplementary documents that you could do to your will, wherever you do have specific things that you want to be gifted to a particular person. You can, of course, make that legally binding and include it directly in your will via, the content of the will or a memorandum that's attached to your will. Or you could also do a letter of wishes that is maybe referenced in your will, but it's not necessarily legally binding, but you would kind of ask and expect your executor to, carry out those wishes. And a lot of folks do choose to do kind of a letter on the side that they can change a little bit more easily and frequently than the will itself, where they would outline, things, their wishes for their personal effects, which obviously oftentimes can help avoid a lot of stress and strain in the estate settlement. So that's something important for people to keep in mind. Another thing that I think a lot of people do talk about is whether they put them in place or not. But a lot of people do certainly talk about kind of pre-planning their funeral or burial based on, their wishes. So I think that would be something important to include in your estate plan, certainly, especially if you do have those arrangements in place, because worst case scenario, you've gone through all the trouble of making these arrangements and then your family doesn't actually know about it when the time comes. So super important to include.
And I would avoid putting those in the will if you can. You can choose to do it; it's fine. But what I find is difficult is, what if there's a mismatch between what's in the will, which can take a few days or a week or so to uncover the will, and if there's a mismatch between that and your actual wishes or what the pre-arrangements were, and then you made a decision that is contradicted in your will that doesn't. That can put a lot of people. If someone was cremated instead of buried,
Of course, yeah.
that the level of guilt that your children will have for this miscommunication is to be avoided.
This is all, by the way, stuff that should hopefully be covered in kind of a family meeting where you do communicate the different elements of your estate plan to your family members. I think there's maybe a few other things that some people might think about or include in their estate plan around messages to their families, maybe recording a video or a note or things like that, that kind of express themselves. And I think, practically speaking, a lot of people don't necessarily get around to doing this. We do tend to see it more for folks who unfortunately have maybe some type of health diagnosis that makes them think about this a little bit more seriously. But certainly this is also something that would be considered and could be included in a estate plan. Is there anything else you think, that might be relevant or important, Alex?
I would say the one thing to add to the inventory of assets is, if you have something that may not look like much but is tremendously valuable, having an appraisal certificate. Again, it's a point in time. It doesn't have to be the right amount, but knowing that in 1984 this watch was worth $15,000, maybe it's grown in value, maybe it hasn't, but at least it's a hint to that we need to reevaluate what that asset is worth. And I'll always talk about the infamous Monet that is now sitting in my office. But we had a case where the family thought there was a Monet, and it wasn't a real Monet. And then the family was kind enough to gift it to me.
when
But
when they realized it wasn't a real Monet.
yeah, exactly. And yes, absolutely. But we everyone did their due diligence, and we looked into it, and we treated it as though it was a real Monet. But all of this could have been avoided if the actual art collection, because there was actual art, if every piece had been properly assessed ahead of time, we would have known immediately that maybe that Monet had a meaningful emotional connection to the deceased, but it wasn't actually worth anything on the market.
I will add one more thing that is actually super important for your executor to have, and that is the tax costs of everything essentially that you own. And in some cases, that's relatively easy because you hold an investment account with securities that are publicly traded, but in some situations it's not as easy, right? So including your example of artwork, but also other things like maybe shares that are not publicly traded, and different unique assets or collectibles and things like that. Even real estate, sometimes it's hard to track, especially if it's like been owned for a really long time and perhaps was transferred, from one owner to another without a sale. Things like that are important for your executor to have as well.
Yep.
Okay, great. I think that was a good summary of the elements of an estate plan. Could you maybe elaborate on, in our experience, I mean, we've helped thousands of families at this point with estate planning and estate settlement. Like, what happens when you don't have a proper estate plan in place?
What happens is that the family dynamics take over. That's often what happens when there's a lack of planning, and those family dynamics may be surprising to you. I mean, you're no longer here, but I found that within families, people are often surprised. And the reality is, when there's money problems within some of the beneficiaries, they're not screaming it on rooftops. So when you put the combination of grief, I've just lost someone that was important to me. I have financial problems or perceived financial problems. There's a potential large sum of money and unresolved family dynamics or baggage. The combination of these four things makes for a very explosive cocktail a lot of times. And I've experienced that. I know you've experienced it through multiple estates that you've worked with. And I feel that no one wants to talk about the emotional aspect of administering an estate. We all talk about the grief portion that follows the death, but there's emotional drivers and dynamics that take control of estates, often for periods of 18 to 36 months, and that is very damaging to families over the long term.
From a financial planning perspective, estate planning is often seen as a final step because you're doing a lot of other things that are super important for folks, right? Including retirement planning, looking at income and expenses, and how your investments are held, and all of those, wonderful, important things. But sometimes that means that the estate planning part is actually maybe overlooked. And sometimes it's kind of just seen as a tick box, unfortunately, right? And I've actually seen, situations where financial advisors ask, do you have a will in place? and their client says yes, and they tick the estate planning box. And so I think unfortunately that isn't really a sufficient estate plan. And that estate planning could be viewed as even a starting point when you're doing financial planning because it exposes a lot of different things about the client and their circumstances. What are your thoughts on that, Alex?
Yeah, I really, yeah, I do agree. I think, and I think I understand why. I think in order to be a very successful financial planner, you need a very specific set of skill set, and you get trained having very specific conversation with folks, which are savings dynamics, right? Making sure that we get the hygiene and the discipline together to do a proper savings plan, and that we our expenses don't blow out of proportion. So creating that education and having those conversations with clients takes a specific set of skills, and starting transitioning towards, well, now that we're saving and that we're building wealth, growing that wealth, and in the end, having a conversation about like, what are we going to do with that wealth into retirement? So having that is a very broad set of conversation that is about growth, yeah, generating long positive impact. I feel like going into the let's talk about your death portion is a very strong shift in conversation, and death is very taboo in our society. I think I'm often reminded at family dinners and dinners with friends at how comfortable I've become in having these conversations and casually talking about death. But I think that's a very very large portion. And then the second reason in my book is estate planning is actually a very broad field in itself that needs a lot of technical and know-how and information in order to be successful at. So and it's hard to find people who have all of this information, all of this knowledge, and all of these skills and these people conversation skills, and inside one individual. I think that's very. I don't have it. I can't have those financial planning conversations. But I am, and we are equipped as an organization to have estate planning conversation and going into like what happens after retirement and how do we plan legacy overall.
I'm going to lean in a bit to what you said about, being comfortable with having those conversations. I'm curious to know, like, what are your tips for that? Like, how do you actually approach, or how would you recommend that advisors or anyone really approach having those, difficult conversations with family members or clients?
As I do with many things in life, I take a positive spin on things. I think I think it's beautiful that we are able to build wealth for a long time and be intentional about how we want to see that wealth and our legacy carry on beyond our lifetime. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I think it's uh, there's there's great control that comes with it. Sometimes too much control, and that's a conversation we should have. But I think putting all the elements in place of an estate plan allows for that a level of comfort, that of security, and knowing that I'm preparing my family's future, and I'm not talking intergeneration. Well, it's always intergenerational wealth
Hmm.
if you're giving, right? I'm not talking billions of dollars. I think and legacy goes a lot beyond that, and it's just like having the right thought for the right people in your family that you care for, and how you want to structure how your assets are being passed on after you go, and just getting used to the fact that we're all going to go at some point. I'm sure there's people in Silicon Valley fighting really hard against that, and perhaps one day they'll be successful. But until we come back with the Ozempic, no no promotion here, but the Ozempic of long life elixir, then I think we should embrace the fact that there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it's very natural.
And yeah, well, I'm waiting on that update in the medical field. But
Yes.
until then, we'll keep plugging away doing what we're doing. It's interesting. I'm curious to know, like, we hear a lot of talk these days about values-based planning, and I'm just wondering, do you feel like people are thinking more and more about their legacy beyond just money and stuff? And if so, like, how does having a comprehensive estate plan fit in with that?
I think that when you get to a point where you have the opportunity to give yourself time to think about what you want to do with your values, how you want to transmit things, I think all of us are, most of us are the victims of some sort of childhood trauma that gets transferred. And then you have two stances: either you mimic or you correct. If you choose to correct, then that means that you can have a intentional conversation with yourself and your spouse and your loved ones around around what happens next. And oftentimes that means avoiding the repetition of what you went through. I think I want my children to grow up more comfortable than I grew up. I want them, and I want them to benefit from, and I want their children to grow up even richer than they grew up themselves. That being said, that's just not enough because I think without the right set of values, I think people can see wealth as a crutch and not develop the skills themselves to be fully fledged human beings. And I think those are really interesting conversations to have with spouses. And where do you take? Yeah, it's a bit playing mad scientist in terms of like over generations. It doesn't mean things will play out how you plan them, but at least you had a plan, you had a direction, you're going somewhere, and then life will happen, and people will get to make their own decisions. I don't know. How do you think about it, Sarah?
Well, I definitely think that these days it's more and more important for families. I mean, that's what I see. Like, people are thinking more and more about not just what, monetary things they're going to be leaving their families, but how their families will remember them and how their legacy will carry on through their loved ones, through traditions, that they have. A lot of things that, I mean, it's not that they weren't important things before, but I don't think they were front of mind when people were creating a will or a power of attorney document, where or doing financial planning or anything in that realm. And I think today people are thinking of these things as linked together with and not separate from their planning.
And I think that's why an estate plan is never one and done. It's a moment in time. And right now, I have young children. I'm creating a security net in case something happens. And as they become adults themselves, then it will transform into something. It will transform about making sure my spouse has everything she needs, and then it will transform into, well, making sure my grandchildren are organized, or there's something for them, and making sure that my children my adult children can access property, can have entrepreneurial opportunities if they wish it. I think that's how you can support the system, allowing them to develop the grit that they need. But that will transform over time, and I can't plan over the next 50 years. I'm barely, well, I am, but my children are barely out of diapers at this point. And I don't know what's next. I can look up to you, Sarah. Yours are a few years ahead of mine, to know what trouble I'm about to step into. But it's always that trouble. My father-in-law recently told us, like, you start sleeping when your kids have their own kids, because then you're like, okay, they're actual adults now. Although before that, I was worried sick for the entirety of your lives. So it's interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Parenthood is quite a journey in and of itself. We'll have to do a whole separate episode on that. So I know, Alex, you have some personal experience settling estates. And I think that, when you talk about the difference between a will and estate plan, that, at least some of your perspective, comes from that. Can you kind of walk us through, maybe, what were the drawbacks or whatever you experienced that was negative with respect to settling the estate as it related to, having a will versus an estate plan?
Yeah, I think I've shared it on a separate podcast episode, but if I do a very, very quick summary of my experience, my father passed away when I was in my late 20s, and it was unplanned. We didn't have a will, and naturally it was a bit of a shit show to get everything organized and understand what needed to happen. So we thought, hey, for my mother's estate, we're going to do a will, and we're going to make sure there's a power of attorney, and that we've checked all of the boxes that the lawyers and notaries told us were the right boxes to check. And I think when my mom passed away, I realized I was going through a very similar experience, whether planned or unplanned, than I had gone. I think the most helpful thing we did is she had funeral prearrangements, and that was actually very, very beneficial to the process, because it removes a lot of decision making ahead of time. So I think that's really important. I and I think years later, the thing that I struggle to get over is I realized I could have had a 2-hour conversation with my mother that would have saved me months of work and doubt and misunderstanding and looking for things. I you know my I was still a young adult. Like, I was in my 30s when my mom passed away. So and my career was very. I didn't have children yet, but my career was very demanding, and managing all of the financial institutions and finding all the assets during the working hours of a work week was very difficult. It's like all these financial institutions are open from 10 to 3 p.m. Monday to Friday, and not all the staff is well equipped to have estate conversations. There's not everyone at the branch knows exactly what conversations needs to be had, and so there's a lot of information, misinformation, and I thought that was very difficult. And now that's kind of the way we've structured our estate planning process with ClearEstate. Is one of the first conversation. Every conversation you have with someone at ClearEstate from the sales process. Helps fill your vault and prepare the information that is required towards settling your estate in the future. We pride ourselves in being very efficient in that regards. But there's the first meeting after you've said, yes, I want to work with ClearEstate. We call it the intake. And that's the conversation I never had with my mom. It's a conversation of, hey, where's the stuff? What do I know? What don't I know? What family dynamics am I going to uncover, despite me being an only child? What family dynamics will I uncover once you've gone? And I would have saved a lot of time, and I would have found out a lot of precious information that would have been beneficial to me when the time arose.
It seems like uh, your experience, is probably not that unique either, because I think a lot of, lay executors, when they go to deal with an estate, for the first time, they're realizing, okay, I'm not only am I needing to represent the estate, like I'm essentially stepping into the shoes of my loved one that's just passed, except I don't have all the information that they had about, where everything is and all those little nuances that aren't captured directly in a will. But also, they need to then administer the estate and deal with all these various third parties as if they know those things, but also as if they know sort of, what's expected of them and, how they're expected to kind of do. It's almost like they have to know the other person's job too when they're actually dealing with administering the estate. So it's just there's a lot of kind of unknowns that you're stepping into.
And there's a catch 22 that nobody thinks about. The catch 22 is until you have probate, you're kind of a nobody, and banks don't want to talk to you, and you don't really exist. But in order to get probate, you need so much information that you can only get once you have probate. So there's this
Yes.
like weird dichotomy of, but I need this information. But I have, and I know you need this information, but I can't give it to you, or I won't give it to you, and that's very frustrating.
Yes, absolutely. That's very true. And in fact, what we see sometimes where it is particularly unfortunate is in cases where there is no known asset whatsoever. And so the family is actually trying to figure out, is it even worth it for us to pursue anything in the estate administration? And they actually don't know. And they can't get that information unless they go apply for probate, but they have no information to go apply for probate. So yeah, absolutely. Most people you can kind of at least prove that there's like a bank account somewhere, even if you can't confirm the value of it. But some cases, truly, family members have no information to go on, and then obviously that's a huge issue that really can't. There's no known resolution other than just spending money to try to figure it out, right?
In Quebec, you have 6 months following a death to accept or refuse the succession. And if you don't specifically refuse, and there's a number of steps and to follow in order to refuse succession,
Hmm.
if you don't refuse it, you're deemed to have accepted it. But in Quebec, there's many moments during COVID and after COVID and before COVID where it can take more than 6 months to get the death certificate. So
Hmm. Yeah.
before you have the death certificate, you are really a nobody at that point. You're a nobody claiming that there's a death and can't prove it. So this again, another catch-22 that makes it very, very difficult to understand how to navigate things, especially in light of the fact that when you're the executor, you kind of you have a fiduciary duty, and it means you kind of tie yourself legally and financially to a certain point to the estate, and until you've done it, you don't really actually know what that means or how deep that rabbit hole goes.
And the death certificate you're referring to is a provincially issued death certificate, I think, right? Yeah.
Yes,
So
correct. Yes.
unlike in many other jurisdictions where you traditionally get the death certificate from the funeral home, and that is sufficient for a lot of purposes. Some jurisdictions require provincially issued ones, which take a long time, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about specific things that are part of an estate plan that are not necessarily in a will and why that can kind of trip people up sometimes.
Right.
I'm thinking, for example, you know, what if you have jointly held property, like assets that pass outside of the estate and are not necessarily in the will itself, mentioned in the will itself? Like, how can that trip people up?
Yeah. One of the things I always say is like family members don't tear each other apart over who should get the RSPs. It's typically over emotional items that family tear each other apart, and or sometimes it's a collection that it was very dear to your mother. Sometimes it's an old car that was everyone in the family learned to drive on that car, and like there's an emotional attachment. We've seen a famous one at ClearEstate where it was the last batch of apple pies that was baked by their mother, and
I'd
so
fight
it's
for that too.
yeah. So I think there's a few things that are required. One, you need the will. Yes, we produce wills. Everyone should get a will. It's important and it helps. I think I think having a power of attorney in this age where there's a lot more cases of dementia, a lot of people get cancer. There's moments where you might not feel comfortable making financial decisions for yourself and pay the bills and get all these things done. Someone has to pay the bills. And then that's on property. Then there's personal care. Like, what if I can't make medical decisions for myself? Someone has to be able to make some medical decisions that are tied to my values and what I truly wish for myself. And thinking that this is not a pleasant conversation, but it's a conversation that needs to happen. And so there's all sorts of advanced care and incapacity directives that can be produced. Uh, Understanding where all the assets are and what has beneficiary designations, and if they don't have them, should they have them? And a lot of you and I have done webinars together, and where we explain how people try to game probate by abusing beneficiary designation. So they are a beautiful thing, and they should be used. They should be used in the knowledge that of how it will be applied, and what the impact will be. So overall, just a clear inventory of assets and liabilities, including what I want with personal items. I think like that's the emotional thing that is important. If you have very strange assets that not a lot of members of the population have, like crypto and NFT coins and private corporations or commercial properties, if you have a shareholder agreement or have anything like that, these are documents that we need. If you were born outside of Canada and your birth certificate or your marriage certificate is in another language, there's things that should be done about it in order to prepare for it. If there are, if your financial advisors has told you that there's going to be a large capital gains event when all the assets need to be disposed of, then there's tax considerations to be put in place. Things like passwords. Where are the passwords? What are they? How do I find them? Who's your accountant? Was there a lawyer? There's all sorts of things like that with a structured conversation, we can pull these things very easily and organize them properly. It's just people don't know which questions to ask and answer, and they don't fully understand what is required for probate, and what makes for a smooth estate administration process. And above all, let's talk about family dynamics and understand what we're going to find out after a death, and who to look out for, and how to protect certain people, sometimes against themselves.
I want to hone in on a couple of things that you mentioned there. One, and this absolutely always comes up inevitably when we're talking about, potential conflict in an estate settlement, and that is, essentially personal effects and how important sentimental value is for folks. And from what I've seen, a lot of times when estate planning is done or wills are done, this is not really something that's covered in detail. Unless, you own some super valuable type of collectible stuff. A lot of times, personal effects are sort of glossed over. In fact, I've seen many wills, not prepared by ClearEstate, that don't mention personal effects at all. And Oh, sorry. I just realized I shouldn't have said it like that because actually we have had wills. So scrap that. Let me restart that question. Um, so, one of the things that comes up a lot in estate settlement and that you've raised as kind of can be a gap in estate planning, especially if you've only focused on the will itself, is personal effects, right? And how these can cause conflict and strain, and ultimately that people maybe don't know your intentions, right? Which is probably the most important thing. I've seen many wills that don't mention personal effects at all, and I think people don't really realize that in the absence of specific instructions, it sort of falls to your, residual distribution in your will. So basically, if you leave your estate divided between your three children, then the personal effects automatically, become divided between three children. Have you ever tried dividing something between three children, that doesn't divide like a whole number? Like it's not necessarily as straightforward as you might think. And so I just wanted to ask what are some things that could be done instead? Like how would somebody go about, or even starting to think about this, never mind actually, implementing a plan for it.
Well, besides going back in time and fixing some of your parenting techniques, uh, I would say no.
I'm
I
making a note of
seriously,
that.
no. I would say let's have a conversation about it. Hey, here's my plan. Hey, children, here's my plan. Are there things that are more important to the other? One of the good examples about like things that are hard to divide is a lake house. You have three children, one lake house. You have one of your children that lives in Alberta, one is in BC, one's in Ontario. The lake house is in Ontario. Who should get it? And so that's hard to devise. It's hard to have a cohabitation agreement between siblings. Again, different people have different journeys, and it's possible that one of the three children will have a financial difficulty in their lifetime. It happens, and maybe they would love to have the cash from a third of the
Yeah.
sale of the lake house. But how do you force the sale? How do you organize it? So it is very hard. I think having the conversation ahead of time is one way to do it. If you have very clear opinions on what your wishes are, because that's also important, you can take the stance of, what is most practical to you children and you, I don't care either way. How do you want to divide that? That can be a conversation that can be had. Another point is you can decide for your children, this is how I wish to dispose of my assets, and that's also a fine way to do it. But then we suggest doing what we call a family meeting. So once everything is set up, it's like, hey, children, just completed my will and estate plan. I would like to walk you through my intentions and my wishes through this. Again, this is a structured conversation that we support families in having, and that sometimes we can facilitate. And in that sense, information is power, and I think it resolves a lot of issues. The worst, one of the worst things that happens to families during a death is typically one of the children is the executor. And then that person has all of the information and all of the control, and all of the other children are kind of at the mercy. But then the executor typically is ill prepared to do this. You do that once in your life, usually. You don't know what to say, when to say it, how to say it. And then you're perceived as withholding information. People become suspicious of you, and that drives weird tensions within family members. That again, information or appointing a non-family member or professional executor to handle can eliminate that.
Alex, I'm wondering, obviously you've covered kind of, what is the difference between a will and an estate plan. Like, why do you think like wealth advisors, financial planners should sort of, care about this distinction? Like, why is it important for them as they go about their important work with their clients?
Well, if you spent 30 years building your client's wealth, you don't want to see it tearing apart families or being dilapidated by family members suing each other and going to courts. The only people that win at that time are the lawyers. That's not the intention. I also think it's an opportunity to build bridges with the next generation. And I think a lot of wealth advisors, I'm hearing this more and more. Like, there's two things I'm hearing a lot. It's holistic financial planning, and I'm hearing a lot about creating a mini family office and kind of like thinking about mini multi-family office, if you
Hmm.
want. So I have many clients that I follow over their families over generations. And I work with the grandparents, the parents, the grandchildren, and I will work with their children as well. And I think if I was a wealth advisor, I think I'd find I'd find it very rewarding to work kind of in that way and make sure that the wealth we're building is being transferred properly. I also think that aligns with their financial incentives, and that's not a bad thing either, right? If you're doing a great job protecting your clients and their assets and their wealth and building it and growing it, then as any professional should, you should be rewarded beautifully as well. So I think that's why wealth advisors should do this and really support their clients in making sure that we've checked the estate conversation box properly. It's not just do you have a will, yes or no, and I stop the conversations there like no, great, what a great opportunity uh, to think about what the next steps are. And yes, great. Is it still up to date? Right? We ran a huge poll a few years ago, and what one thing that we found is that I think it's something like 18% of people have a will in estate plan that's like up to date, where there hasn't been major changes in beneficiaries, executors, that there hasn't been a death in the family, a divorce that restructures who should get what. So it's hard to maintain, and it should be revisited in a timely manner every year. You should think yes or no. Do I need to update my will? And then usually the answer should be no. So that's great. But probably every 5 to 10 years, the answer is going to be maybe or probably, and then that's a conversation to be had.
I think there's some great tips in there, and I'll just end Alex on a quick thank you for being with us today, and a quote from a recent blog post that you did, where you talked about this exact topic, and essentially the bottom line is that a will might protect intentions, but an estate plan protects people.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. Appreciated our time together, and thanks for for keeping me honest about my opinions on estate planning at all times.
Always.
And thanks for hosting this. It's really appreciated.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex.
So, Sarah, any final thoughts on your conversation with Alex?
I mean, I think we did a thorough explanation of what an estate plan is and how much more it is than just a will itself. And I think I'll just maybe reiterate that, asking clients if they have a will in place and kind of ticking off that box is just the beginning of doing a proper estate plan. There's definitely much more to it than just making sure that they have a will in place. But I'll ask you a question, Davide. Where were you when you learned the difference between a will and an estate plan?
I was at ClearEstate. No, but it's interesting because you spend a bit of time in the space and realize and you meet all kinds of great people and it feels like every week or every month you you meet somebody else that brings another layer of complexity to the estate planning process, and you hear stories of people that have done it well and people that haven't done it well, and it's super inspiring. So I think that distinction is important. But the simplicity of the distinction also kind of hides the complexity of the process. So I think we, great episode, and I think we'll do more of those. Don't forget to share and subscribe to The Endgame by ClearEstate on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. Thanks for joining us. Take care.
ThinkBait. TNKR Media. Good talk.